everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, July 15th, 2019, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. And this week, we're going to be chatting with a super cool woman, Alexis Pedrick. But before we do, I want to thank those of you who have made Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and that's because of support from listeners just like you. So I want to read off a list of the top supporters on the show this week, and they include Phil T-Bear, The Zombie Drummer, David J.E. Smith, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. If you want to hear your name read at the top of the show, just visit patreon.com/talknerdy. Remember, you can also visit talknerdymerch.com and buy some cool Talk Nerdy merch to support the show. All right, let's get into this week's episode because it is a good one. So Alexis Pedrick is the manager of public programs at the Science History Institute in Philadelphia. She is also a co-host of the Distillations podcast, which is a super cool podcast that they put on at the Science History Institute. The subtitle says, Using Stories from Science's Past to Understand Our World, which I absolutely love. And this week, we're going to focus a little bit on rare earth elements. It's a fascinating chat. I know you guys are going to love it. So without any further ado, here she is, Alexis Pedrick. Well, Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Okay, so this is going to be kind of an interesting episode for me because we're going to talk about a subject that I have very little knowledge about. So you are the manager of public programs at the Science History Institute. Where is the Science History Institute?
So we are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
I love Philadelphia so much.
It's a great city, right?
It's a great museum city.
Yes. So I enjoy it.
Awesome. And so what is the Science History Institute all about? I mean, it's I see on the website that kind of the subtitle underneath the logo is Chemistry, Engineering, and Life Sciences.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, really, our mission, right, is to explore that intersection between science and society. So all of those stories about how science gets made, how it happens, the innovations and also, right, the failures, because that's part of science too. We try to be keepers and stewards of that information. So we have a free museum that's open. We have a research library and archives, a rare book collection that's pretty cool. We have a fellowship program where we host visiting scholars from around the globe. We have an institute for research where we do a lot of research, think a lot about big ideas. And then also our outreach where we do public programming and, you know, my other side job, which is I'm host of Distillations, one of the hosts of Distillations, our podcast. So we do a lot to try and talk to people about this and have these conversations and share that information.
Oh, I love that so much. I feel like you really have a handle on the sort of science communication lifestyle in that even though you're like a staffer, like you work for an organization and you probably collect a salary there, you basically are doing the job of a freelancer because you're wearing like 900 hats.
Oh, 100%. But I am a huge nerd, so this is like dream work for me.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It also says on your bio that you are like heavily involved in Science on Tap in Philadelphia.
Yes. So Science on Tap is a monthly science cafe. We host it in a bar called National Mechanics, which is next door to the Science History Institute. And it's us.
So cute.
And oh, it's great. It's great. Our saying is eat, drink, science. So it's the Science History Institute, and we have 5 other museums in Philadelphia, and we all partner together, and we host these talks every month and have scientists come in, and people come and drink a bunch of beer and eat a bunch of great food and talk about science and ask questions. And it's really fantastic. We've been doing it for this year is our 10th birthday. So we've been doing it for 10 years. We have at this point introduced somewhere over, I guess we've had over 13,000 people over the last 10 years. So
wow.
It's been pretty great.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Also, I'm seeing that because you are the manager of public programs, so you oversee a lot of these things that the museum does to interface with the public, which is like a massive part of what a museum is. I also see that you produce First Fridays. I love that you guys have a First Fridays. We have one at our Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles, and I think First Fridays is one of the like coolest museum things in the world. Like, I'm so glad so many museums do it.
Oh, no, it's awesome. So we did First Friday for about, I want to say maybe 7, 8 years. We just recently retired our First Friday series, and now we host a second Saturday series where we have speakers come in once a month, and we have coffee and tea, and we just invite a bunch of people to chat about science, to ask questions. So we've talked about black holes, we've talked about dark matter, we've talked about bioprinting, all sorts of other stuff. Basically, I get to sit around and think about what are all the multitude of ways we can talk to people about these ideas. And I think science communication it's key, right? And I mean, I think when you think about rare earths, right, it's core to that. I mean, at the end of the day, we all had science class. We all remember the periodic table, kind of, right? We all
yeah.
semi a smidge, right? And so, we're out here in the world and we're hearing all sorts of terms get thrown around. There are lots of people chatting about it. And how are you supposed to know what any of that means? And more importantly, what does it actually mean to your life? And so for me, the fun part of the work is to take all of those ideas and research and things that people are working on and figure out ways to make it meaningful.
Absolutely. I love it.
I'm a little bit spoiled. I get to just like dive into stuff all the time. So it's good. It's a lot of fun.
That's so great. So we're going to dive into rare earth elements in just a second. Before we do, though, I was wondering like how you personally kind of came into this world of science and history, but also communication, interfacing with the public, because, there's not really... I think we're getting to the point where we have these sort of multidisciplinary degrees and where science communication actually is starting to develop a foothold in sort of academic programs. But for the most part, there's not really a kind of laid out training path to do exactly what it is you do for a living. So like, what did you study in school and how did you come into this?
So it's interesting. That's such a great question. I'm glad you asked, because I always tell people that, so my undergrad is in psychology, and I also studied European history, and then my master's degree is in arts and humanities. And so everything on the face of that does not tell you this person works in science communication, right? But, for me, I was the first person in my family to ever go to college. My dad had an 8th grade education. My mom eventually got her GED, but for me, I was the first person to sort of go right from high school and go like straight into college, right? And so, it was a learning experience. And this was the kind of job that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even know this was a thing. It was a possibility, but I knew that I loved history and I loved talking with people and I loved thinking about things. And so, as I kept working in the nonprofit field, in the arts, I just kept, I think, kind of steering towards this in a way. And now I can look back and say, oh, okay, I see where I was going. But I just really followed the things that were super interesting to me. And I was really interested in history. And I've always been really interested in science. And so I just kind of followed this winding pathway until now I'm lucky enough to be able to call that what my job is.
I love that. We've talked about this a little bit on the show in the past, especially when we talk about women in science, women in color in science, or women of color in science. And we talk a lot about kind of the experience of being a girl in sort of our society and the way that girls and boys are often treated differently in school. I think my own personal story is that I'm a prime example of somebody who like didn't think I would be good at science. Like I think maybe deep down always had an interest, but never pursued it academically until after my psych degree and kind of I discovered neuroscience and stuff like that. But like many young girls, when I was in middle school, high school, I was somewhat involved, but I was also very tentative about kind of going into a science career because I didn't think I was good at it. I didn't think I was good enough at math. I didn't think, X, Y, and Z. Did you have a similar experience, or was it just that, psychology, history, humanities, philosophy, religion, all those things were just like so much more interesting to you that you felt the need to dive fully into them?
So I'm going to tell you, my husband's going to be so upset. My husband's a middle school math teacher. I struggled so much with math. And the messaging to me, similar to you, was that like, if I wasn't good at that there was no pathway to science, right? If I couldn't get my head around that, then like, just forget about it. There was no option. And so, yeah, like you, I sort of carried through believing like, oh, this is an interesting thing, but like, I'll never be able to do anything with it. But I'm really great at history and I'm really great at writing and I love to read. So like, that's great. And it's interesting you said neuroscience because that is sort of how I came into science myself too. I got in undergrad, got really interested in neuroscience and I took a bunch of classes and then I realized to understand it, I needed to understand what the brain did and how that worked. And so, that became like a gateway. But I think maybe not on purpose. We had this program we did a couple years ago with high school students where we talked about girls, like STEM toys that are made for girls, right? We had this Science at Play exhibition. And so we were talking about, what does it mean when things are coded a certain color, when there's a certain sort of messaging around it? How does that change what you think is possible? And one of the things that they talked about was that it was more important for them to see other women doing this work and to know that it was possible than it was to be worried about sort of like what the toy colors were and what was available and that sort of thing. And so, any opportunity I have to tell people like, hey, I do this work and I don't look like what you probably close your mind and imagine someone who works in this field to look like. And I want to shout that from the rooftop so that, maybe there's some other little girl who's sitting there and saying like, oh, this is not really for me and this is not a pathway for me. And she knows, oh, wait, there's somebody else that looks like me that does this. And so that's possible. And I think that's powerful.
Absolutely. And I think it even has like a sort of double utility for you and your work because obviously the importance of role modeling like cannot be understated. But on top of that, you have to empathize and think about frame and think about perspective in the work that you do because you're developing programs for the public. So not only are you personally an incredible role model for so many young girls, you have to think about how the kids that come through and the adults that come through your different exhibits and your different programs are going to perceive them and internalize them and learn from them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I always say my strength is that this is not, I'm not grounded in this, right? This is not what I spent my entire career studying. So I have a really broad knowledge, but not a super deep knowledge. And it's great because when I'm working with when I'm working with scholars, I'm working with researchers, I'm able to say, okay, here is where I get stuck. Here's where I get lost. And if I am lost, when we go do this for an entire room full of people, there's a high likelihood that they're going to get lost too. So let's try to break this down and make it work in a way that we can come along on the journey with you. Because, the thing that we've discovered or that we know is like people are really curious, Being curious is great. It's a lot of fun. But the first step of being curious is admitting you don't know something. And that means being in a space where it's encouraged, it's even welcomed for you to not know something and to want to learn more about it. And so we try as much as possible to do that in our work, that it's fun to go down this rabbit hole and just figure out all these things because the world is weird and wacky and it's great.
And speaking of a weird and wacky world, so obviously there are all sorts of really incredible programs at the Science History Institute. There's all sorts of really cool stuff that people can learn about. But one thing that I thought would be fun to highlight in our conversation is this rare earth elements project. So this is like a kind of multifaceted project, but it's core focus is on sort of rare earth science. And I've literally never, I don't think even broached this subject on Talk Nerdy in the like 5+ years that we've been doing this show, interviewing hundreds of scientists. So I'm so excited to talk about this because I know like nothing about rare earth chemistry, about, quantum science, about these metals. Like, I'm so excited to talk about rare earth elements. Like, first of all, I think the most important question is like, what are they?
Aha, yes. So that is a good place to start. And I'll tell you, honestly, before we started going on this project, I knew sort of tangentially what they were, but even I didn't really know that much about them. So it's been fun. So I find the best way to think about what rare earths are is to think about the periodic table, right? So it kind of lines up. 2019, the periodic table is turning 150. So it's the International Year of the Periodic Table, which is a big year for nerds.
That's so cool.
Nerds like me.
I gotta pull out the periodic table t-shirt for sure.
Exactly. So if you think about the periodic table, right, you've got all the elements are sorted together into groups and things that have similar characteristics are just like hanging out by each other, right? So you've got like the group 1 elements and the alkali metals, which a researcher here helped me understand them as the things that you basically drop in water and they explode. That's a good way to think about them.
I love that.
And so, good. So rare earth elements, they're hanging out in group 6. So technically they're the 15 lanthanides plus scandium and yttrium, but they're exceptions and science is all about exceptions. We'll come back to that later. But the thing is they have stuff in common, right? So they're metals. They're kind of silvery, silver white kind of. And they've got high luster, but they'll tarnish when you pull them out and put them in the air. They have high electrical conductivity, which will come up. And so they're stable isotopes, which means they don't decay into other things. So they're not radioactive, which is almost 100% true, except, of course, science exceptions. There is one rare earth element that is radioactive, but the rest of them are not. The big thing that really matters is that they are hard to separate. So you think about gold, right? If you've ever watched one of those shows, Gold Rush, like my husband watched Gold Rush all the time. And he's always telling me like, you know what, we're going to go out there and I'm going to get my claim. And, and so if you watch them panning for gold, right, they pull out the dirt and they're running some water through it. And, it's pretty easy to like sift through and like figure out which part's gold and which part isn't. And that's not the case with rare earths. That's not how they show up at all, which is part of why they get sort of complicated and interesting. And so that's where they are. And they have these unique properties that make them, they're basically in all the things, all the stuff we really like and use, they are hanging out there.
I feel like the one thing I know about rare earths is that like they're in my iPhone.
Yes.
That's like the one thing. I'm like that they are super interesting and weird, that they are a finite resource, and that they're in my iPhone.
Yep. That's true. And they're in your car, they're in your phone, planes, satellites, all the industry processes that make all the things that you like. And you're not alone, right? Most of us, I love my iPhone. I love my iPad. I'm using it right now. I could not tell you how it works in grave detail, right? I know that it works. I know that somebody did a lot of great work to figure it out, and there's a smart person over there that like, great, but I don't know all the detail and the nuance of what's in it. And so for most of my life, that doesn't really matter, right? I can still use my iPhone. I can still use my iPad. I just still drive my car. It's fine. But in the case of rare earths, if you've been listening to the news for 5 minutes, you'll hear this word tossed around, and now it's coming up as part of sort of all these debates, and it's in trade and et cetera, et cetera. And you don't know what they are, right? And so then it becomes important to sort of get a little bit of a grounding in them. So, yeah.
For sure. And like, I'm looking at your website right now, not your website, but the Science History Institute's website. And it's so great because on the kind of homepage for the Rare Earth Elements Project, one of the first infographics that you see is, I guess, some polling information. And it's like, when it comes to rare earth elements, 26% of people said they had never even heard of them. 32% said they were somewhat familiar with them. 35% said that they have heard of them, but were unsure what they are or their significance. And only 6% said that they were very familiar with them.
Right.
Yeah, I'm in that 94%. And I do this for a living. So.
Exactly. And I think, if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like I said, I mean, we use, if you think about, I'm going to forget the name of this book and it's terrible, but if I remember, I'm going to send it to you. But basically, If you think about the Industrial Revolution, right, that happens, you have all this industry, it's making all these things we use, and it's really hard for us, the more complex it gets, for us to know how everything works, right? So 16th century peasant, like, even if you don't like sew a dress, like, cool, you understand how it works. Like, you know how the thing gets made. And now we really don't. And frankly, as the world has become more complicated and technology has become more complicated, right, it's even harder and harder to understand and keep track of that. And I think that's why, we're sort of, because we're a museum and we're educating people and we're doing lifelong learning, I think we're in a good space to talk about this, because for us, this is not like, there's not going to be a quiz at the end of a program if you come in, But if you are curious, if you are hearing about this and you want to kind of know what it is, this is a place that you can come and you can learn a little bit more about it. And that way, when you're listening to the news in the evening, or you're, having a conversation around the dinner table and somebody mentions it, that like you have some grounding, like what it is and kind of why it matters. And, no one's going to quiz you on the atomic weight or, anything like that. but kind of knowing what is this all about and why do we care so much about it is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I need to know more. So obviously, we talked a little bit about like what they are in terms of like where they live on the periodic table, that these are specific. There's 17 of these rare earth elements, and they have these like kind of interesting properties. Maybe we should dive a little bit more into what these interesting properties are.
Yeah. So one of the things that I get to do, because it's my job, which is a lot of fun, is a lot of storytelling, right? And so like that's what we do on Distillations on our podcast. That's what I get to do as a host. Like, it's a lot of fun. And I also find storytelling is like a good way to sort of wrap your head around what can be sort of a huge complex topic, right? And so if you think about rare earths, basically, they get discovered. If I had my dream world, I'd hop in a TARDIS. I'd bring us along, and we go back to 1787, live our dreams. But alas, we can't do that. But if we go back to when it's first discovered, it is it's kind of exciting, but like nobody really knows what these things do, right? And so for about 100 years, they're hanging out. We got them. We've named some of them, but we're like, meh, who can say really what they do? And so
gotcha. Okay.
It's not until, so you're not alone in that, right? That makes sense. And so it's not until there's this guy, Karl Auro von Welsbach, and I'm probably going to mess up this pronunciation, but so he's this academic scientist, and this is like the 1880s, and he has aspirations of becoming an industrial tycoon, right?
Okay.
Because Edison is doing his thing, right? He's like, this world, lighting is big industry in the 1880s, right?
And for sure.
So he wants to find something he can like do with them. And so he figures out that he can start making these gas mantles with rare earths. And so if you think about like Mary Poppins, right? Like, you know, what the gas lamps look like and you know, the lamplighters coming around and lighting them up. That's the gas mantle, right? And so he uses rare earths to make them light up, right? Because they give off, I said they have high electrical conductivity. And so they give off a lot of light. They're super, super bright. So he tries a couple of combinations, takes him a little bit to get it right. But eventually he's able to get this beautiful yellow light, right? And it becomes like big industry. The problem is because of the way rare earths are all molded together, like I said, the parts that he needs to make the gas mantle, well, he ends up with a lot of waste. And rare earths are very flammable.
Yeah, so that's a little bit dangerous for like your everyday lantern user.
Yes. And so what he finds, though, is that this pile of sort of waste that he has keeps like igniting.
It just has like a flaming pile of garbage left over.
Yeah,
good.
you know, and it's like, so what do you, he wants to be an industrial tycoon. He's a scientist. So he's like, let me solve this problem. And he realizes, oh, I can make something else out of this. And so he makes the lighting flint. It's actually like, so if you have like a cigarette lighter or something like that, it's basically the same thing, right? And so that's really where the properties of rare earths, you start to see like why they get used and stuff, right? And so it's the things that they do, like any other element, right? That help make a thing that makes stuff easier, you know? So back in the 1880s, it was like gas lamps, they were all the rage. Great times, you know, and so if you fast forward now, like you've got a whole bunch of other things that rare earths do that help us make stuff easier. So like, for example, magnets, right? So if you have a magnet and you want to use it in like a wind turbine, right? You need a really strong magnet, but you also need that magnet to be light. Because if it's a huge, heavy magnet, it's going to be a problem. And so, right? And so, you know, there are rare earths that when you put in combination, they create a permanent magnet, but that magnet is really, really light. And so it makes it perfect for that, right? And so that's really what we're talking about. When we say like they're in everything, it's because they're like these like little building blocks that, you know, help us make the things we want to use.
And so like, could we do what we do with modern kind of technology and modern engineering without them? Or are they fundamentally necessary? Is it that they are kind of a building block that we couldn't live without? Or is it just that they are like a better building block?
Oh, man, if I knew the answer to that question, I would have solved, like...
I see. So if anybody knew the answer to that question, that would be a big deal, huh?
See, exactly. So here's what I will say. It's complicated, right? As most answers are, right, in science. And so...
Absolutely.
Are there things we could come up with that are replacements? But yes, right? One of the big things we actually, that they're talking about a lot in the industry now is recycling. Not so much that you can use something else with it, but that you can sort of recycle it, recycle all of these kind of what's considered waste or whatnot and reuse it, right? But yeah, I mean, it is... Yeah, if we had like another thing that could replace all of them, I mean, sure, that would be great. I don't know that exists. Probably what it would be would be a lot of other little different things that would all be complicated to use and to get for lots of other reasons. And so, you know, we should be really cognizant about the cost to the environment, and we should keep trying to figure out how to make that cost lower, and we should keep trying to figure out how to recycle and to be better. But I got to be honest, I don't know that we could just replace it with a bunch of other stuff.
So we really need them, which means we need to be smart about how we use them.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, you know, a lot of the conversation we've been having, and like I said, for us, our role is not so much, we don't know all the answers. I want to be clear up front. We don't know all the answers. If we did, like I said, we would be getting a Nobel Prize or something, right? But our goal is that, to have exactly that conversation. What does it cost to get them? What are the problems? What are the pitfalls? What are the things we really gain out of doing it? And what are the things that we lose? What are the complications? And by having those conversations and thinking about those things, I think you start to create an environment where people who are not me, but other people who do this for a living, that this is their work, can begin to think about ways that we can solve those problems, because big complex problems don't have easy answers. They have big complex answers. And so, that's part of what this process and this project is about, is thinking about that.
It's incredible. And I have so many more questions to ask you, but I think this is a really good point in the podcast to take a really quick break to thank the sponsors of the episode, and we will be right back. All right, guys, let's get back to the show. All right, guys, we're back with Alexis Pedrick, the manager of public programs and podcast co-host of the Science History Institute in Philadelphia. So, Alexis, we've been talking about rare earths and all of their really interesting properties, what they are, what they do, why we need them, why we love them. I would like to maybe dive into some other questions regarding rare earths, some of the things that maybe we haven't quite gotten into yet. How do we find them? Where are they?
Whew, wow. So this is, you know what? I'm going to say something that's going to sound really crazy, but I promise you it's going to make sense. Because when someone told me this, I was like, what? So rare earths are not rare.
Oh my gosh. Wait, what? Can you say that again? Because now I'm my whole world is blown.
I know. Maybe we should have started there. Rare earths are not rare. Okay.
So, all right. Good to know.
So part of the reason, and there's this really great scholar who does great work on this, but so part of the reason we call them rare earths is a thing about, you have to think about how language changes over time, right? Mm-hmm. So when we discover rare earths in the 18th century, we call them rare earths. And at that time, people would have understood that to mean new, as in they were not here before, but they're here now, right? And earths was really about talking, it's really in terms of geology, it's soluble in acid, right? And so, over time, language changes. And now we think about rare, it means special. It means, maybe there's one, possibly two, but no more than three, Yeah,
it's like an economics thing. It's a supply and demand thing. Yeah, that's what we think. We think rare, there's just not that much of it.
Yeah. So now I'm going to take that thing that I just told you, and I'm going to complicate it even more. So rare earths are not rare. But it's also not wrong to say that they are rare. And what I mean by that is that rare earths are abundant. So they are found, all over the Earth's crust, right? However, because they're all smushed together, like I talked about, they're not dispersed in quantities that are, let's see, how do I want to say this? It's when you pull them out. Okay, so think about if you have if you have ever played with Play-Doh with a little kid, which I have done. It's a real intense process. There's a lot of rules you got to follow. Apparently, I've been breaking all of them, right? And so if you've ever had that nightmare scenario where all the Play-Doh is all smushed together in one ball, right?
Yeah. All the different colors. Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to try and get one color out, right? Think of it like that, right? So it's hard to get them. It is difficult. The process to separate them out is a difficult process. But they are not rare in terms of their existence, right? So really the problem of rare earths is really a problem of abundance. It's really for the things that you use them for, to get them, they're found in small quantities sort of all over the place. And so how do you then come up with enough uses and make those uses make sense so that the mining of them makes sense, because you're going to pull out that big thing of Play-Doh and you need one color. So what do you do with all the other colors, right?
Because I would assume that's like an intensive, kind of expensive, and also somewhat like maybe wasteful process.
Yeah,
okay.
definitely. So that's really that's the challenge. So that is, when you think about what are we trying to figure out, it's that, because that process of separating them out, that's a lot. It's not easy and it's expensive. So that's one of the things to figure out. But it's not because there's like 4 of them in the world, or because like there's only one place you can get them from. There are, in terms of like whether or not you want to mine all over the world, that's a completely different question. But in terms of just like, do they exist in places, like lots of different kinds of places? Like, sure, yes.
So like, could you find them potentially on every continent? Could you find them in a lot of different kinds of geological formations, for example?
Yeah, so like there used to be, I believe it's still there. But there was a mine out in California in Mountain Pass, right? I believe Australia does a lot of it now. Obviously, there's a ton of rare earths mining that goes on in China. Rare earths were found in this little village in Sweden called Ytterby. And so if you look at the names of the rare earths, 4 of them were discovered in this little tiny village. And so that's why Ytterby, yttrium, like that's where the name comes from. So there are multiple places where they exist. So it's a different, in that way, I find it really interesting, because then it's a different kind of problem, right? It's the problem of like, if it only exists in one spot, that's okay. Yeah. All right. That is a pretty standard, like, okay, well, what do we make to reduce our use of it? Because there's only one spot where it exists. But if it exists in lots of different places, but the process of getting it does damage, then what do you do? That's a different conversation. It's a different calculus. So yeah, it is a really, I was like you, I came in, I was like, cool, rare earths. We're going to talk about like, what are there? There's 17 in the world. And
yeah.
And the really lovely, smart people that I get to like interview and talk with and pick their brains all the time were like, no, actually opposite. So
then I guess an important question would be, why is it then, and I'm sure that obviously because this is a complicated topic, why is it then that pretty much every time you hear a conversation around rare earths, that conversation is also very heavily layered with sustainability concerns?
Right. I mean, so part of that is just comes down to like, what are one of the things you use rare earths for? And that's, so when you hear a lot of talk about like green technology, about, wind turbines, like I was talking about, your hybrid cars and all that sort of stuff, that the production of that stuff uses rare earths. So, if we're going to have a conversation about ramping that up, then you have to have a conversation about ramping up the production of and mining of rare earths, right? It's all connected. And so that's one side of it. It's just like purely, it is part of that industry. But the other side of it is, the sustainability of actually mining them, because, it's a pretty, to say it has an effect on the environment, mostly in the form of like radioactive water. But, that process, the acid that they give off when they're trying to dissolve and separate them, like it's not good. It does a lot of damage. And so if you are living in an area where that mining is going on, that's like in your community, that's your home, like it is having a serious effect. So that is also part of the conversation. It's not just like, can we make sustainable things with this stuff? It's also about like, okay, but we're not really doing good if we're hurting the environment to make sustainable things so that we can save the environment. There's sort of there's a problem in that process, right? And so it is about thinking like not only just making sustainable things, but how are we going to be sustainable while trying to get this material?
Gotcha. So while rare earths are sort of in the ground in these, like, I don't know, would you call them alloys or just like mixed up with other elements in the ground, they're pretty inert. It's really the process of trying to purify them and extract them that can cause all sorts of kind of environmental ickiness.
Right. Except for like I said, our one exception to the rule, there's a radioactive rare earth element. That's an exception. But
Do we use that?
For the most part.
Do we use the radioactive one?
You know what? I don't know what it's used for.
Interesting.
I feel like I have read at some point it was, and this is the downside of being like a historian too, because all the time I'm like, wait, was that now or was that in the past? Think about this, Alexis. So I'm not sure. I don't want to say for sure what we use it for if we use it, but yes, what you described is essentially what the problem is. It's that process of trying to like separate them out.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. And so it's about kind of the potential for pollution. It's about the potential for sort of like toxic secondary effects that can be dangerous for people or for wildlife living in the area. But it's not so much about the fact that we're just going to remove it all and then there won't be any left.
Yeah, it's not quite that sort of concern.
Okay.
And it's interesting. There's a guy, Eric Shelter at University of Pennsylvania, and he'll be at the event we're hosting in the fall. And one of the things he works on is looking at developing new chemical processes for separating them out. So that's what I mean when I say like there are lots of people thinking about this and doing this work and asking these questions and trying to solve this problem. And for us, that important part is like, oh, well, let's like bring this conversation out into the world, right? So that people who, again, like you, like me, like 94%, right? Who have not really thought about it in any kind of like way, because, you know, life is busy, life is full. We all got lots of things going on.
Yeah.
That we can be a part of that conversation, because, you know, if you're talking about sustainability and green technology and all those sorts of things, those conversations are happening and they're going to affect your life. And so, you know, knowing a little bit about what's at stake is good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I think it's so important, right, when it comes to just sort of like basic science literacy. And like you said, like we can't know everything all the time. And I don't think that we should feel guilty or put a lot of pressure on ourselves or constantly go through life feeling like we're not good enough or we don't know enough. That's obviously not the point of trying to improve science literacy. But ultimately, if we're going to be using these devices and if we're going to be engaging in the world and utilizing resources from the world in the way that we so heavily do in such a like technologically focused society, there's something kind of sad about the fact that so many of us just don't even understand the basics of where these things come from. Like, you know, that kind of phrase that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think most of us just have like these magic boxes that we really like to use.
And you know, magic is it's not a bad way of thinking about it. And it's not crazy, right? You know, I think it's funny because when we work on our podcast, when we're like, I'm sitting around, like we're working on Distillations and I'm with my producers and my co-host, and, you know, we're trying to figure out these stories because we're working on a rare earth story too that's coming out at the end of this month. Like we are like grappling with that same information as people who are like, I mean, we work in this world and in this, you know, are in this sort of arena. And even we find ourselves being like, okay, wait, hold on a second. So this connects to this and wait, how does this affect this again? And I've never heard of this thing and, all of that. So like even us who are like, on the inside, somewhere in the arena, somewhere in the stadium, even we are still trying to sort of figure it all out and make sense of it. So no, I don't think like nobody should feel bad. What you should feel is feel curious. If you hear about it and you're like, wait, what? I've never, then feel curious and then, seek out information. I think that for me is the best response, I mean, because we're a history organization, one of the things I get to talk about a lot is alchemy, and people think of alchemy as like, like that. wizards.
Yeah. And they don't really see that this was just like pre-chemistry.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is the thing when you think about it, alchemy is magic, right? That connection makes sense, right? Here is these things that happen in the world, and we know they happen, and we can predict them, and we can see them, but we don't really understand how it works. And so it has this mystical element about it. And so I think, this is, much the same way. I like that my iPad's going to be like, hey, by the way, you have a meeting at such and such a time, and that I can Skype people and that I can do all sorts of things. But sort of how that works, it feels very much like magic. And I don't think that there's a bad thing about that, because I think, it's good to keep some sense of wonder about the world. And I think, for me in science communication, I'm always trying to tell people that there is no downside to not knowing, right? To not knowing means you can go out in the world and get some answers. But just the aspect of not knowing, the aspect of sort of feeling a sense of wonder, because the world is full of wonder. It's a weird place. It's really crazy. It's great. I think that to me is exciting. That's the way you felt when you were a little kid and you were just like, I got to get to the bottom of this. My job, I want to try and get adults to feel that very same way,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love that. I mean, it's so true that one of the best things about science, and I think history too, there's so much parallel between science and history. So I think when I read books by science historians or I interview science historians, there's just this really cool passion, I think, that always comes through, because they are I don't know, they're so synergetic, I guess you could say. And one of the coolest things about it is that there are always questions that you can answers to uncover. And then every time you uncover another answer, it opens up a million more questions. It's so much fun. I think that's unsettling for some people. Some people like the idea that we just know and then that's the end of it, but that's just not true. That narrative just never ever plays out in real life.
Oh no, absolutely not. And one of the things, so it's interesting, right? So as we've been working on this project, we've been talking to lots of different people, and you begin to see how many different scientists, researchers, institutes, all sorts of people sort of all working on the same idea, the same problem, sort of all grappling with it. And I always tell people that is how science gets done. This idea that scientists are shut away in their labs and they're by themselves and they're just, having that one stroke of genius that just comes in and they just they're isolated, that's sort of a myth. It's not really how it works. Science is done with lots of different people all taking a piece of it, and it's fundamentally because of what you just said, right? Every time you have an answer, it's not really an answer, right? Because there's a bunch more questions that you can ask once you have that. And so, this collective process, this community of people who are curious about the world and are trying to gather some knowledge about it and put some sense of order around it, that's a huge community. And it's everyone from, yes, the person who works in a lab or does research or, is an academic or a historian, to the person person who's just like in their backyard with their kids saying like, hey, look at these bugs. They do cool things. Let's like, take a closer look at them and see what we can figure out, So we're all doing science all the time. We are. It's part of being human.
Absolutely. And how much do you think that kind of core concept, sort of the foundational stuff that we're just talking about, underlies like everything you do in your job?
Oh, I think that's a huge part of it. I think about it like, we host a ton of different programs, but we also have, social media. We have our podcast. We have an online magazine. We do lots of things. We have like a book club. Like we're talking to people all the time in lots of different ways. And one of the things that's special about that you begin to realize is that everybody shares that desire to want to know how a thing works, right? And the thing that you want to know how it works might be different from the person sitting next to you, but we all know what that feels like fundamentally, right? We all know that feeling when you're like, oh, okay, I want to take this apart and figure it out. And so my goal is just always to try and recreate that feeling as much as I possibly can in as many different ways as I possibly can. So
yeah, I love that.
It's a tall order, but it's also it's a lot of fun. I think, I tell people come be a nerd with us. That's fine. You have found your people then.
I love that. Oh my gosh. That's like my favorite phrase in the world. There's something very it's so funny that you say that because I have a core friend group over here in LA. We actually call ourselves the Nerd Brigade. It's very dorky.
Oh, I love it.
I know. We have a theme song and everything. It's ridiculous. But I can't tell you how many times I've heard that refrain that oh my gosh, I finally found my people. And it's so meaningful to me. I get kind of choked up sometimes when I think about it because it's such a rare and incredible gift to be able to cross paths with somebody and connect with them, not just emotionally, but intellectually. And I think that institutions like yours, like museums and outreach programs like the ones that you do, provide not just entertainment, not just information, not just personal fulfillment, but also a social service in our society that allows people to connect in a way that's much deeper than I think they often get to connect to at work or traditionally in a bar or at a concert or some other kind of what we think of as the more standard social settings.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have, so when we host our Saturday speaker series, I tell the speaker, okay, we schedule it for an hour and we bring in some coffee and some tea and, people come and they hear the talk and then we just have a conversation. We ask lots of questions. And I mean, I have been amazed by the number of times I have found myself 3 hours later, still hanging out with people, talking about an idea, finishing off the dregs of coffee. And then I'm like, oh, I'm being a bad programming person. This is supposed to be over, but it's so interesting and we're having so much fun, and I think, that's the sort of, for me, it's important for you to have fun when you're learning, because if you're having fun, you're probably learning it more, learning it better. And that social part is important because, we humans we're social beings. We want to be around people. We want to talk to people, we want to share in that experience. And so, if you come here and you hang out and you learn some interesting things, it's funny, the thing we ask people on our evaluations is not so much what did you learn? This is a quiz. Tell us the information. Yeah. We ask, did something you heard today surprise you? Mm-hmm. Did something you heard in conversation or heard from the speaker or even heard from another person, did it surprise you? Did you have that really wonderful moment where you were oh, whoa, wait a minute, this way that I thought I saw the world just got shifted just a little bit. And if that's what's happening, then hey, like job is done. So, I will never like ask people like, can you name all 17 rare earth elements, right? Because that's not my goal. I'll ask people, okay, do you know a little bit more about what they are? Why are they important? Or even why are they not important to you? Like, what do you think about them now, knowing some things about them? That's my goal.
I love that. Oh my gosh,
if you can answer that, you get an A+, right?
Yay, A+ in science history. That's
exactly.
So great. Well, gosh, Alexis, okay, like you mentioned before, you made like a small reference to, but I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't really give it the promotion that it's due, that you have a big upcoming public event in September about the intersection of science and society with regards to rare earth elements. So tell everybody about that in case if they're around and they're able to attend.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be Tuesday, September 24th, from 7 to 9:30. It's going to be at Hudson Loft, which, as far as I know, being a person in Philadelphia, is in Los Angeles, California, right?
It is. I think it's in downtown LA, which is super cool. Are you going to be there, or are you just putting it together and then not coming?
Here's the thing. I am not. I am going to be in Toronto at the Aztec Conference, the Association of Science and Technology Centers. So I'm really sad because it's like the downside, and because like you get to work on this thing, and then it's like, oh, I don't even get that that sweet spot moment where I get to stand afterwards and be like, woohoo! But yeah, we're excited. So we have a number of different scholars, researchers, people working in this field. It's going to be a really awesome conversation. It's going to be moderated by Ira Flato. So if you listen to NPR Science Friday, that's who's going to be there hanging out.
Awesome.
So yeah, again, doubly very sad. Toronto's going to be great, but I'm very sad. But yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, really our goal is to get at that. Why have most people never heard of them? Sure. But also, they're essential to our lives, and getting them comes with these challenges. And so what are we gonna do about the health impacts, about the environmental impacts? What do we need to be thinking about? What already is happening? And what stuff should be floating around in your brain there, so that when you're listening to the news, or you're having that conversation, or you're getting out there to vote, or doing whatever it is you're doing, that this is in your head, and you know a little bit more about it. So it'll be a really fun, engaging night. It's going to be an awesome conversation. We definitely want you to just come hang out, I think, and just have the conversation, ask the questions, and take a couple hours and be curious.
Oh, I love that. All right, cool. So that's Tuesday, September 24th, 2019, 7 to 9:30 at Hudson Loft in DTLA. Guys, come out. If I get a chance, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more on social media and stuff, but if I'm available, if I'm not filming, if I'm not seeing patients, because my schedule has been so crazy lately, I would love to go out, and maybe we can do like a fun meetup there. That would be super, super cool.
That would be fantastic.
Right? And then we'll miss you. We'll wave from afar. But
yes.
One of these days, we're going to meet in person and hang out, because I have a feeling we would get along very, very well.
That would be lovely, and I need reasons to go to lots of different places. I have never been to California. So
oh, no, you've got to come visit us in LA, and you can meet all of the really cool nerds here. Yeah. And the next time I'm in Philly, I'm definitely going to hit you up, because I'm obsessed with Philly. I love that city. I always have to hit up the Mutter Museum when I'm there, but I haven't been to the Science History Institute, so I have to go.
Well, come and visit us, hang out with us. Yeah, definitely. The Mutter is great. They also do Science on Tap with us. They're awesome friends of ours. But yeah, if you, I would say you would not think that there is as much weird stuff here as there is, but man, there is some really weird, wonderful stuff. So yeah, come get lost.
Weird stuff. That's so great. All right. Well, Alexis, before we go, I close my podcast every week by asking my guests the same two questions. And they're kind of big picture, kind of deep questions. I'm definitely interested in your take, because you have this really cool historical science perspective. So are you ready for them? They're big.
I'm ready. I'm going to.
Okay.
Okay, so,
I'm
ready.
do. So you spend a lot of time learning about the past. And of course, as we always, like the adage is that you have to understand the past in order to navigate the future. So these questions actually have to do with the future. I want you to think about the future and tell me, on the one hand, the first question is, what is the thing that really does keep you up the most at night? The thing that maybe you are a little concerned about, maybe even a little bit pessimistic, borderline cynical, just something that you're legitimately worried about. But then on the flip side of that, I want to know that when you look to the future, what are you, really excited and optimistic for?
Let's see. So I will say, probably because I work in this world, definitely what keeps me up at night is thinking about the challenge of the environment, thinking about like, whoa, this is a huge thing. So like, how are we even going to begin to get a handle on it, right? And, it is very easy to, at least for me anyways, because I'm like an information junkie, to sort of go down the rabbit hole of thinking about and reading about all the different things that like, oh, okay, that's another thing on the list we need to fix. Oh, all right. Well, there goes another problem. Oh, okay. Yes. Carbon. Okay. We haven't done enough about that. And so it's easy for, when I think about that, especially because I think me, like so many other people, I'm not a scientist, and so I am not like working on this every day. And so I also don't then have a good basis for like, what do the solutions actually really look like? And that's really scary. On the other hand, because I do history, it doesn't keep me up too much, because I think, in all of this time, man, there have been, many moments in history where lots of things have gone wrong, and it has seemed like, well, that's it. We should just pack it in. Yeah. But we have figured it out, right? And if you look at history, you see a lot of stories of how we just kept like knocking our head up against the wall and just like pushing through until we figured the thing out. And so I am actually confident that over time we are going to figure it out. It just means that people keep having these conversations and keep participating and keep staying active, and that, at some point, we'll all be gone unless, I'm turned into a vampire or something, then I guess I'll be here. But, a long time from now, someone will look back and be like, yes, 2019, oh, those fools, they didn't even know. and they will have figured it out. So that's my hope.
It's so beautiful, and it's so necessary, and it's so important. And Alexis, I thank you so much for joining me this week. This was a fascinating chat. I learned so much. I had so much fun, and I'm really looking forward to coming one of these days to visit the Science History Institute. Anybody who's living up there in sort of the tri-state area or like New England at all, or anybody who's like, in Philadelphia right now or anywhere from across the country, go check it out. See some of these really great exhibits. And if you are in Los Angeles in September, hopefully you can come to the Rare Earth Elements, the Intersection of Science and Society event. Alexis, thank you for being on the show today. I had so much fun.
Oh my gosh, me too. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.